Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 45 days left till the World Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana will begin in November in London. On Chess to Impress we continue the countdown towards this great event. It is the 47th event in the history of the undisputed and official World Championship, and we're looking at all the 46 earlier events. We have arrived in 1961. Mikhail Tal has become the 8th World Champion. And as per FIDE regulations, Botvinnik had the right to a rematch, which was played the year after. Tal was suffering from ill health before the match, something that plagued him for the rest of his life. Botvinnik demanded an official doctor's certificate for this. Tal said, "Never mind, I'll beat him as it is." But it was not to be. In Tal's first 8 black games, he lost 7 of the 8 games and only made 1 draw. After the match, Tal said, "I think that I lost to him because he beat me. He was very well prepared for the second match. Botvinnik knew my play better than I knew his." Very sporting way of accepting a defeat by Mikhail Tal. Here's the picture of the 1961 match. The challenger Botvinnik on the left and Tal on the right. And in this video we're going to look at the 11th game from the 1961 match. Let's get into it. It is the 12th of April 1961, white is Botvinnik, black is Tal, and this is game 11. d4, knight f6, c4, c6, knight c3 and d5, an unusual move order to get to the Slav defense. And Botvinnik plays the exchange variation, which is not as equal as it looks. We now see a lot of symmetrical moves, but white is always a step ahead. C takes d5, knight f3. Also the exchange variation is a good choice against Tal, who likes to play dynamic positions. And by playing the exchange Slav, Botvinnik is taking this away from Tal. He's hoping for a small advantage to be able to squeeze his opponent. Knight c6, bishop f4 and bishop f5 is one of the variations. Totally symmetrical, and the symmetry goes on for a while. The e-pawns are played up. The bishops are developed, and knight e5, and now the symmetry stops. White is putting pressure on the knight on c6. Tal played queen a5 here, counter-attacking pressure on the c3 knight. Botvinnik takes with check, creating a weak pawn in black's camp after b takes c6, and he castles. Takes the knight out of the pin. Botvinnik goes for safety for his king, not being worried that he will go a pawn down temporarily, because Tal took on c3, b takes and queen takes. Black is up a pawn. And now look at this move, queen c1, forcing a queen exchange to make the game even more technical. You cannot avoid a queen exchange, you cannot go back to a5 for example, because queen takes c6 check wins the rook in the corner and wins a lot more, wins the game. So after queen c1 you have to swap the queens. Queen takes, rook takes, and Tal castles. f3 from Botvinnik, still not taking the pawn back on c6. That pawn is not running away. f3 is taking control over some more squares and preparing a possible e4 or a g4 h4 push, gaining space. Space is an important motif in this game, as we'll see. h6, making air for the king. Now Botvinnik takes the pawn back, restores the material balance, and also has an idea of knight e7. With a check, taking the bishop and ruining black's pawn structure. So rook fe8 is a logical move to take that knight e7, takes f5 idea out of the position. The only reason that white is better here is that his knight is better than black's knight. It's a very symmetrical position. All the pieces are okay, but white's knight is a bit more active than black's. That's the only reason that white has a slight edge here. a4, very nice move from Botvinnik. The b1 square is not available for the rooks, and Botvinnik wants to develop his rook maybe this way. Knight d7, bishop d6, making the bishop more active, and bringing that knight e7 check and taking on f5 idea back in the position. Knight b6 with the idea of bringing the knight to c4. That would be a very nice square for that knight. Here Botvinnik decides not to play knight e7. He plays bishop c5. He's going after the a-pawn, as we'll see. Here Tal did not go for knight c4. It's not very good because of e4, a variation shown by Grandmaster Keen in his book. The bishop then goes back to h7. White swaps on d5 and plays knight e7 check, winning the d-pawn. So after bishop c5, Tal played bishop d3, activating the bishop more. And now white has a tactic to win a pawn. And the tactic is knight takes a7, a nice tactic, taking the defense of the knight away. Rook takes, bishop takes, and white has an extra pawn, but it's not easy to convert that pawn. Rook a6, a5, and bishop c4. The passed pawn is blocked. The bishops are of opposite color. This is not easy to win at all, even though white has an extra pawn. Let's see how Botvinnik plays this. He plays rook a3, f6, and e4. King goes to the center, so does white's king. Rook back, king e3, and rook eb8. Now black has a threat, threatening to take the bishop, because this pawn is pinned. The rook on a3 would fall. Botvinnik did not fall for that trap. He played rook ac3 and rook c8, taking any ideas of rook takes c4, sacrificing an exchange out of the position. What white wants to do now is create a second weakness in order to have chances to win this game. He has the a-pawn, but he needs something else to be able to win this game, otherwise black just stays put and that pawn will not go anywhere. So g4, rook ab8 and h4, gaining space, controlling more squares. That is what white is doing here. Rook c6, h5 and rook bc8. Black can't do much, so he shuffles around. Botvinnik keeps gaining space, keeps pushing his pawns on the king side, and Tal now played g6. Black feels he has to counter white's advance on the king side to avoid being squeezed to death. An alternative is f takes e5, then d takes e5, that gives the white king a nice square on d4, and also he then has a plan with f4, f5, grabbing even more space in black's camp. So g6 was played, Botvinnik took, king takes, and rook 3 to c2. White now has succeeded in getting a second weakness in black's camp. This pawn is very weak. It's also on a dark square, and it's a square of the color of white's bishop. Rook 3 to c2 is to be able to switch to the h-file and put a lot of pressure on that weak pawn. Tal took on e5, d takes, and rook h8, protecting that pawn. Rook swings over, rook c8, and look at this move. This is really a beautiful move. Botvinnik shows his wonderful endgame technique. He plays king d2. Would you have come up with that move? I certainly would not, but it's very logical. It frees up the e3 square for the bishop to go to put even more pressure on that poor pawn on h6. Botvinnik has total control over the board. Bishop b3, a very odd move, allowing the a-pawn to advance, and Botvinnik grabs his chance. a6, and the bishop goes back to c4. Tal's previous move, bishop b3, was really a very strange move, because the pawn ends up on a7, only one step away from the queening square. Rook h7, rook a1, and now white is threatening to promote. So Tal occupies the queening square, and bishop e3 as planned. If you now play king g7, then rook a to h1, and white is attacking that pawn on h6 3 times. In the game, Tal played rook b7, giving up that pawn on h6, king g7, and there comes the other rook to the h-file. The pawn is still protected by the bishop. Botvinnik has completely outplayed Tal in the endgame. He's 2 pawns up and has an easily winning position. Tal gave a spy check, rook b2, after which he resigned. There's really nothing more to play for. The game could have continued with king c1 and then rook a2, saving the rook, rook h7 check, and if you go to g6, then the game is over. This is checkmate. And if you go to g8 instead, then there is rook h8 check, winning the rook on a8. Just to give you one example how hopeless Black's position was. Botvinnik won this game, won game 11 and extended his lead to 7.5 against 3.5. Tal himself said about this game, "It is difficult to explain by anything but demoralization. My decision to play the Slav defense for almost the first time in my life, almost imploring my opponent to exchange on d5, and with a lead of 3 points let me off with a draw." Botvinnik fulfilled the first part of this program, but for some reason he considered his lead to be insufficient, and he adopted a continuation for White, which he had prepared some 15 years before our game. Black was unable to find the correct rejoinder, and soon after the opening, the game transposed into an endgame highly favorable for White. And Botvinnik went on to win the match. After 21 games he had assembled 13 points. We saw only 6 draws in this match. 15 decisive games, of which Botvinnik won 10 of them. Mikhail Botvinnik had regained the world title. And as mentioned, Mikhail Tal did not use his ill health as an excuse. He very sportingly said that his opponent had played better than him. Unfortunately, Tal never played a match for the World Championship again. And after having played against Bronstein, Smyslov and Tal, it was the turn of Tigran Petrosyan to challenge the great Botvinnik. And that's what the next video is about. Hope you are enjoying the countdown towards the Carlsen-Caruana match. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will make sure I reply. If you like the video, if you like the series, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. The link to the series is here. And this is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.